Dawn crept over the dense canopy of Mahé, painting the treetops gold while leaving the undergrowth cloaked in shadows. 6 British soldiers lay buried beneath leaves, rocks, and death itself, or what looked like it. For 5 days they had not moved, eaten, or spoken aloud. Their orders were clear: survive unseen, or die for real. Captain James Kilburn blinked just once as a low rumble echoed from the stone fortress above. Every bone in his body ached. Dried blood crusted his leg. He barely breathed. 10 yards away, Sergeant Ellis shifted slightly, his fingers trembling. "5th day, Cap. Can't feel my legs," Ellis whispered, voice rough as gravel. "You'll feel them when we run," Kilburn muttered. Then, clarity. A bell rang inside the fortress. Sentries turned. One yawned. A gate creaked open. Kilburn's lips curled into the first smile he'd dared in days. The enemy thought they were dead. That was their greatest weapon. Today, the corpses would rise. Captain Kilburn hadn't always been this man. 5 years ago, he was teaching boys Latin in a stone schoolhouse in Derbyshire. Now he buried himself in mud and counted breath cycles to cheat death. The Empire had its costs and its debts. His brother, Lieutenant Richard Kilburn, had died in the siege of Pondicherry. James wasn't here for Queen and country. He was here for justice and revenge. Above them, the fortress had grown complacent. The French believed the ambush days ago had killed the last of the British. They dragged bodies to the cliffs. But 6 remained. 6 ghosts. Kilburn looked to the sky, then to his men. Ellis. Cartwright. Duncan. Singh. Baxter. And young Private Miller, barely 18. "We move at dusk," he whispered. A pause. Then a reply, low and fierce. "Then let's haunt them proper." Private Miller couldn't remember the last time he blinked without fear. The boy from Newcastle had never left home until this war, never seen blood until that last ambush. Now he lay still, surrounded by death, sweat freezing in the dawn air. He thought of his mother. Her voice had grown softer in his memory. Would she recognize him now? Would she forgive what he had done? A beetle crawled across his cheek. He didn't flinch. Not when Duncan was shot beside him 3 nights ago, and not now. He was learning, hardening, becoming something new. Kilburn's voice echoed in his mind. "Courage isn't loud, lad. It's what you do when no one will know you did it." Tonight, Miller would find out what kind of man he'd become. Sergeant Ellis had seen more battles than he could count, Boer ambushes, 6 skirmishes, and a bullet in the hip that still sang in the rain. Yet nothing unnerved him like silence. 5 days of lying in stillness, letting ants crawl over his lips, letting rats chew through supplies. This wasn't battle. It was burial. His eyes flicked to Kilburn. Unshakable. The captain looked like a man who had already died once and didn't fear doing it again. Ellis grunted softly. "You better be right about this, Cap." Kilburn didn't reply. He didn't need to. A shift in the fortress guards confirmed it. They were too relaxed. Complacent. Ellis reached down, gripping the hidden blade strapped to his boot. 5 days of silence was long enough. As night approached, a hush fell that was heavier than the air itself. The jungle changed. Sounds faded. The crickets fell silent. Even the French music that usually wafted from the ramparts was gone. Something was shifting. Inside the fortress, candles lit windows. Laughter echoed. A card game. A toast to false victory. They thought the British were done. Kilburn's hand rose. A silent signal. Each man knew what to do. Supplies hidden in the earth were quietly unearthed. Powder, knives, a single flare pistol. This was not a full assault. It was revenge carried in 6 trembling fists. Ellis whispered, "Ghosts walk tonight." No one responded. They simply watched the fortress gates and waited for the dark. Nightfall settled over Mahé like a veil of ink. Shadows stretched long and cold, merging jungle with fortress walls. The French soldiers lit lanterns along the parapets, their golden halos flickering in the breeze, just enough to blind their night vision, just enough to make them vulnerable. Kilburn motioned forward. One by one, the 6 ghosts emerged from the soil. Not with noise, not with drama, with the silence of a curse. Their faces were unrecognizable, painted with mud, streaked with sweat, mouths set with death's resolve. Private Singh crept ahead, his footsteps perfectly mapped from days of observation. A sentry leaned on a cannon, humming. Singh slit his throat before the first note finished. No alarms. The path to the supply gate opened like an old wound. Tonight wasn't about glory. It was about slipping through cracks history never expected them to crawl from. Inside the outer perimeter, the British crept like shadows cast by a forgotten god. Kilburn led, blade drawn, counting every step, every breath. They moved through the brush toward the rear supply gate, a section long neglected, assumed unbreachable. Baxter, the largest among them, hoisted a rusted grate with bare hands. It groaned but didn't scream. They slid beneath into the fortress belly, a storeroom of French wine, powder, and arrogance. Ellis whispered, "Bloody fools stacked powder next to rum." Kilburn smirked. "Makes for one hell of a goodbye." They began planting small charges crafted from salvaged fuses. They weren't here to hold the fort. They were here to bring it down from the inside. Time was short. Once the outer patrol noticed the missing sentry, hell would follow. But if they moved fast, the French wouldn't even know where the fire started until it was too late. Above them, the sounds of celebration continued. Laughter tight. Boots scraping across stone. Somewhere, a violin played a French folk tune. The enemy feasted while death threaded its way through their bones below. Private Miller lingered near a wooden support beam, watching a French soldier lean out a window to relieve himself. The temptation to act surged through him, but he remembered Kilburn's words. Kill the right men, leave the rest to the fire. He turned back. No need for heroics tonight. Just precision. Suddenly, a door creaked. A young French officer entered the storeroom, humming. Time slowed. Miller raised his musket. Singh raised his blade. Kilburn signaled, "No gunfire." The officer looked up, just in time to see Singh's blade flash. Another ghost. Another whisper silenced. Miller swallowed hard. The transformation was complete. The charges were set. The plan was in motion. They would strike the powder stores, slip into the armory, and when chaos erupted, take the gate from within. One shot with the flare pistol would signal the ships offshore. Reinforcements waited for that fire in the sky. Kilburn inspected the final fuse, then nodded. Time to vanish. Each man retreated to his position. Singh and Miller to the east wing. Ellis and Duncan to the armory. Kilburn and Cartwright headed for the bell tower, the fortress eye and its blind spot. Up narrow stone steps they climbed, boots muffled by grime. The bell loomed above, rusted, sleeping. Cartwright said, "Can't believe this might actually work." Kilburn replied, "That's why it will." They reached the top. Below them, the whole fortress slumbered. Soon it would burn. In the courtyard below, the French drank, laughed, gambled. A sergeant kissed a rosary and rolled dice. Another balanced a wine bottle on his head. They were boys. Farmers. Sons. No different from the British men above, except they believed the war had passed them by. Kilburn watched, conflicted. "We're not here to kill them all," he whispered. "We're here to make sure they never forget." He raised the flare pistol. "On my mark," he said to Cartwright. "God save the Queen," Cartwright replied, lips pale. "God save the ghosts." The flare fired, roared as blood rising above the fortress, hanging in the sky like judgment. Moments later, the first explosion ripped through the eastern wall. Fire licked the sky. Screams began, and 6 dead men walked into legend. The explosion rocked the fortress like thunder from hell. Stones split, wine barrels burst, and screams echoed against the cliffs. Panic erupted. French soldiers dashed from bunks half-dressed, officers shouting over each other. Smoke poured into the courtyard, cloaking everything in confusion. Kilburn didn't wait. He and Cartwright descended the bell tower, fast and silent. Ellis had already stormed the armory, musket fire crackling like sparks in a storm. The ghost assault had begun. Singh appeared from the haze, blood-smeared blade in hand. "East wall breached, Captain." "Good," Kilburn said. "We drive them inward, trap them in their own command post." Miller fired his first shot, clean, precise, dropping a French lieutenant who raised a whistle. No alarms. Just chaos. Kilburn knew this moment. The hinge of a battle. Push hard enough now, and history would bend. Inside the shattered armory, Ellis and Duncan moved like wolves. Powder barrels blazed behind them, casting flickering shadows. French soldiers scrambled to mount a defense, but the British were already among them. Duncan caught a saber swing with the butt of his rifle, shoved his attacker back, and turned just in time to see Ellis toss a lit oil lamp into the munitions rack. A thunderclap followed, stone cracked, metal shrieked, and a firestorm lit the night. Ellis emerged coughing, bloodied but grinning. Now they'll feel it. They joined Kilburn and the others, smoke curling off their backs. "We've got minutes," Kilburn said. "Not hours." The ghosts had turned into fire itself, fast, unforgiving, unrelenting. Every scream inside the fortress now was a signal. They're here. They're inside. The command post, center of the fortress, was Kilburn's next target. He knew it held maps, orders, and the cowardly commander who'd left them to die on the cliffs. It was personal now. They charged through the eastern corridor. French resistance thickened. Gunfire echoed. Blades clashed. Cartwright was grazed across the arm, fell to one knee. Kilburn knelt beside him. "Can you move?" "Didn't crawl out of a grave to stop now," Cartwright growled. They pushed forward. The command post door stood before them, locked, reinforced. Kilburn didn't hesitate. He raised the last charge and wedged it in place. "Back," he ordered. Boom, boom. The door exploded inward. Papers fluttered. The French commander screamed in terror, pistol shaking in his hands. Kilburn stepped in, smoke swirling around him. "You should have finished the job." The commander dropped his pistol. Hands raised. "Please," he stammered. "I didn't know." "You knew enough," Kilburn snapped. Cartwright held the man at gunpoint, while Kilburn sifted through the desk. Maps, naval signals, prisoner lists, and British dog tags. Dozens. Tossed like trash. He pocketed them silently. The other soldiers flooded in, dragging 2 French officers and a wounded gunner. Singh tied them with rope scavenged from the courtyard. "Ships are signaling from the coast," Ellis reported. They saw the flare. "They're inbound." Kilburn exhaled. The ghosts had done their part. But the work wasn't over. Lock down the gates, disarm the cannons, and burn the flag. Miller paused. "The French flag?" "No," Kilburn said, eyes cold. "Ours. Let history wonder who took this place." By sunrise the fortress stood still. Smoke drifted over scorched walls. The gate hung ajar. From the beach below, British reinforcements approached cautiously, guns ready, unsure of what waited above. But they found no resistance. No army. Only silence. Inside the command post, a message was scrawled in charcoal on the back wall. "We were dead. You forgot us. We remembered everything." The bodies of the French were covered. The wounded were tended. The ghosts had left no trail, only victory. Kilburn and his men were gone. Vanished into the jungle like whispers. They had come back from the grave not to conquer, but to remind the world that silence was never surrender. That patience, pain, and rage could tear down empires when no one was watching. And in that still morning, the fortress remembered. The sky burned with the glow of the eastern wall. smoke twisting above the fortress like a summoned omen. Kilburn and his men pushed forward with relentless precision. French troops, dazed and scrambling, failed to form a defense line. Panic, not bullets, became the weapon of the ghosts. Duncan, though limping from shrapnel, held steady. Cartwright moved with cold fury, bayonet slick with blood. Singh led the charge toward the gate lever. A crucial target. Ellis shouted, "Blow the gate if you have to." "No need," Singh replied, thrusting his blade into a retreating guard, then flipping the lever. With a thunderous crack, the fortress gates creaked open. Reinforcements had not yet arrived, but the path was clear. Kilburn scanned the courtyard. "We hold the inside. When they come, they'll find the fort already taken. 5 men. 1 ruined fortress." And the rising certainty that history was about to be rewritten. Outside the walls, British reinforcements anchored on the beachhead, eyes fixed on the red flare and rising smoke. Commander Wycliffe raised his telescope, scanning the fortress. "What in God's name?" he murmured. No return fire. No flags. Just carnage and chaos within. He turned to the troops behind him. "Advance with caution. That place looks like the gates of hell." As soldiers climbed toward the fort, their rifles ready, they found doors wide open, bodies strewn across stone, and no enemy resistance. Instead, at the center of the courtyard stood 6 men, drenched in ash, holding ground not like warriors, but like revenants. Wycliffe approached Kilburn. "You hold this?" Kilburn nodded once. "We never left." Wycliffe looked at the smoke, the blood, the silence. "No, I suppose you didn't." The courtyard turned tomb-like as the adrenaline drained. Miller dropped to one knee, hands shaking. Duncan sat against a broken wall, blood leaking through his uniform. Singh crouched over a fallen French soldier, closing his eyes with quiet reverence. Ellis muttered, 5 days of silence, for 1 hour of hell. Kilburn looked around. The fortress had been reduced to bones and ash, but it stood under their control. Cartwright pulled a tattered Union Jack from a broken crate and handed it to Kilburn. "We raising it?" Kilburn studied the flag, torn, smoke-stained. "No," he said. "Let them wonder who took this place." He turned to the open gate. "Let them wonder what rose from the dead." And with that, they walked past the gate, into the smoke, their footprints already vanishing in the dust. That night, as British command officially secured the site, the ghosts vanished. No orders. No ceremony. Just empty bunks and a single note pinned to a crate. "We've done what you couldn't. We're not yours anymore." Kilburn led his men back into the jungle trails, wounded, half mad, but free. They moved without speaking, guided by instinct and memory. The trees welcomed them with silence, the way only a second graveyard could. Singh walked barefoot now, as if reclaiming the ground. Ellis hummed an old tune, off-key but steady. Miller, eyes wide, kept pace without faltering. They had fought not to survive, but to be remembered on their own terms. The jungle would not ask them for reports. It would simply hold them. And never forget. In London, when news reached Parliament, the fortress was hailed as a strategic success. Papers lauded clean victories and tactical brilliance. No mention of men playing dead. No honor roll for ghosts. The war moved on. So did the headlines. But in distant corners, among soldiers, sailors, and those who knew what war cost, stories circulated. They spoke of 6 who lay still for 5 days, breathing like corpses, rising like fire. Kilburn. B. Ellis. Singh. Cartwright. Duncan. Miller. Their names whispered in barracks and foxholes like prayers. Because every man who faced death hoped to rise again. And every man left behind needed to believe that someone, somewhere, had once done exactly that. And won. In London, war files gathered dust faster than medals were pinned. Somewhere in a ledger, Fortress Mahé was marked as a clean capture. No mention of deception. No mention of the six. The official line was neat, bloodless, proud. But in the shadows some knew. Colonel Harwood, one of the few who received Kilburn's final dispatch, read it twice before locking it in a drawer. We were presumed dead. That presumption won us the war. He poured a drink, eyes distant. They'll never be honored, he said aloud. But they'll never be forgotten. He didn't say it to anyone. Just to the empty office, and the silence that lingered with it. Sometimes he'd wake at night, sure he heard a voice whispering from that drawer. Not accusation, not glory, just presence. Private Miller returned to England in silence. No welcome parade. No family waiting. He walked the streets of Newcastle in a borrowed coat, his face changed beyond recognition. At night he dreamt of roots, mud, silence. He worked at the docks, then disappeared. Some say he moved to the Highlands. Others claimed he went back, to the jungle, to the only place that knew his name. Before he vanished, he left a letter with a local priest. Tell them I saw a ghost once, and became one, not because I died, because I lived when I shouldn't have. The priest wept reading it, then burned it at Miller's request. The dead weren't seeking fame, only peace. And they knew peace never came from pages. Ellis stayed in India. He bought a farm inland, planted rice by hand, and never again held a musket. Villagers knew him as the quiet one. Children said he had fire in his blood and shadows in his eyes. One boy asked him, "Were you ever a soldier?" Ellis stared at the fields, the wind in the stalks. "I played dead once," he said. "Then I rose, not as a soldier, as something else." He never elaborated. Each year, on the anniversary of the siege, he disappeared into the hills for one night. Returned the next morning, calm. No one followed. No one asked. In the hush of those hills, Ellis found what many soldiers never do. A place to be forgotten by the world, and maybe, finally, by himself. Years passed. The war ended. Fortresses were abandoned, flags faded, and new borders were drawn. But in the corners of history, deep inside old libraries, fragments lingered. A page torn from a diary. A photo of smoke trailing from a coastal cliff. A whisper in a colonel's memoir. They pretended to die, and then they killed death itself. Historians argued. Was it legend? Propaganda? Madness? But no one could explain the sealed records. The missing dog tags. The shrine in the jungle, tended to even now by unseen hands. One French veteran wrote near death, "I saw them. They didn't run, they waited, and when they rose, they were more than men, they were the reckoning." Truth, it seemed, did survive. Not in ink. In scars. Somewhere, deep in a jungle that now sings only to birds and wind, 7 stones remain. Moss has softened their edges. Vines cradle their flanks. But the names, etched by calloused hands, endure. Kilburn. Ellis. Singh. Duncan. Hung. Cartwright. Miller. And one blank stone, for the ones not yet found. Above the stones, no monument rises. No soldier salutes. But when the wind is right, when the leaves rustle in a certain rhythm, you might hear it. The sound of boots in silence, of breath held in the dark, of history bending. The final line remains, carved in stark defiance. We played dead for 5 days, and then made the world remember us. A whisper from the forgotten, a truth too late, a name history never wrote, but you'll never unhear. Long after the war ended, in a musty lecture hall at Oxford, a professor unrolled an obscure battlefield map. He spoke of tactics and terrain, of naval delays and faulty supply chains. But when he pointed to Fortress Mahé, his voice dropped. "There was an anomaly here," he said, tapping the parchment. No records of troop movement, no formal assault, and yet the fortress fell. A student raised her hand. "So what happened?" The professor hesitated, then smiled softly. Some say ghosts, others say courage so quiet, it slipped through time itself. The students laughed, half believing. But in the back row, an old man watched in silence. Singh, long retired unseen, had come only to listen. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself a smile, not of pride, but of memory. Some stories he knew survive not because they are told, but because they are felt. Singh left the lecture before applause. He didn't need acknowledgement, only remembrance. He walked slowly through the university gardens, past statues of men who never saw the mud or smelled burning powder. He paused beneath an old oak, fingers trailing bark like pages of a book. He whispered the names again: Kilburn, Ellis, Cartwright, Duncan, Miller. Then he added his own. Singh had kept silent not from fear, but discipline. Truth, he believed, should walk quietly, until it's needed. In his coat pocket he carried a faded photograph. The 6 of them, covered in grime, standing before the fortress gate the moment after fire, the moment before vanishing. No medals, no caption, just the proof that ghosts had walked once, and lived. Far away, in a dusty military archive in Delhi, a young clerk stumbled on a sealed envelope marked "Restricted, 1802." The ink was faded, the wax brittle. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside, a single page. They were presumed dead. Let them remain that way. The world doesn't need to know what silence can do when it refuses to surrender. No names. No unit. White cell. Just a list of locations: cliff, ravine, gate, bell tower. The clerk blinked, then filed it away, heart racing. Some truths, he realized, were never buried, just waiting. As he turned to leave, a gust of wind flipped open another folder. Inside, a charcoal sketch: 6 men walking into smoke. He froze. They weren't dead. They had simply walked past the reach of record. In the hills of Seychelles, a traveler once met an old woman who lived alone in a wooden hut overlooking Mahé's coastline. She offered tea and spoke little. But when the traveler asked about the fortress, her eyes grew distant. "My father saw fire," she said, "and men rise from the earth like shadows. He was a boy. He never forgot." The traveler asked, "British soldiers?" She shook her head. "Not anymore. They were something else by then. Anger, mercy, memory." She pulled out a rusted blade, wrapped in oilskin. The initials J.K. were barely visible. "Found it near the cliffs," she whispered. The traveler asked to photograph it. She refused. "Some stories," she said, "you keep in your hands, not on your screens." And she smiled, like someone who knew the ghosts were still watching. Somewhere in a forgotten jungle pass, where vines hang like curtains, and birds cry warnings no one heeds, there's a stone slab, half swallowed by the earth. On it, carved in the simplest hand, "We were the dead who chose to rise." No date, no origin. But on foggy mornings when light breaks like breath through the trees, that slab gleams. Not polished, just patient. Locals say if you place your hand on it and speak no words, you'll feel warm, as if the earth itself remembers something worth holding on to. Not every war ends in peace. Not every victory is recognized. But some stories, whispered between leaves and soil, never fade. They remain, not for applause, but to remind the living. Silence can be louder than any anthem. And that ghosts, when they rise, leave footprints. In a museum archive far from battlefields and bayonets, a dusty trunk was unsealed for the first time in decades. Inside were torn maps, scorched journals, and one peculiar relic, a musket etched with tally marks. 6. An archivist, young and curious, traced the carvings, whispering, "What's this from?" No records matched it. No regiment claimed it. And yet, it radiated something. She logged it, unidentified weapon, possibly ceremonial. But when she held it, a strange chill passed through her fingers, not fear but presence. Unseen, unfelt by most, a voice echoed softly in the stillness. We played dead, but we were more alive than the world ever knew. The trunk was closed again, filed, forgotten, but the weight of it stayed behind. History didn't know their names, but their silence had become louder than drums. The jungle regrew over Mahé. Roots split stone. Vines draped cannons. The fortress that once glared over the sea now rested, gentled by time. No tourists came. No signs marked its story. But still, sometimes on misty dawns, fishermen rowing past the cliffs would pause, hats over hearts. They said they heard things. Boots on stone. A blade sharpening. A bell tolling once, then silence. Not loud. Just close. And in the village nearby the children learned the tale before they learned their own alphabets, of men who fooled death, who lay in wait, who rose not for conquest, but for memory. They didn't fight for the flag, the elders would whisper. They fought because they were left behind. And that, the villagers knew, was a war no empire could win. One final report surfaced years later, buried in the footnotes of a retired officer's memoir. It read, "We assumed them dead, 6 of ours, but they were not dead. They waited 5 days, covered in mud and silence, and then they took a fortress built by gods." The publisher cut the passage. Too dramatic, too unbelievable. But copies of that manuscript, uncut, circulated quietly, passed between soldiers, shared in whispers. It became a legend, then a myth, then something more. In every war after, soldiers were told, if you're lost, hold the line. If you're buried, breathe slow. And if the world forgets you, wait, rise, strike, now wend. Because silence, wielded with purpose, is louder than gunfire. And sometimes, the forgotten become the blade history never saw coming. One final journey brought Kilburn's name back into light. A descendant, researching family records, found a single journal page, water-damaged but legible. We laid still, 5 days. No breath, no movement, just rage beneath our skin. Then, we rose. No signature, just a hand-drawn diagram of the fortress. He submitted the story to historians. Most dismissed it. One called it the finest fiction never written. But the young man didn't stop. He visited Mahé, walked the cliff paths, found the shrine, traced the names. And when he stood there, among the vines, among the silence, he understood. This wasn't a tale of war. It was a tale of return. And that some stories do not seek to be told. They wait to be earned. So now we remember them. Not with trumpets, not with medals, but with silence, with breath held, with stories passed at dusk, with firelight flickering in the eyes of those who still believe that valor can hide in waiting, that fury can sit still for days, and then explode like truth itself. The ghosts of Mahé were not shadows. They were men. Men who were buried by orders, by enemies, by time, but who refused to stay down. They didn't rise for glory. They didn't rise for revenge. They rose because the world forgot them. And they came back to remind it. Final line. We played dead for 5 days, and then rewrote history in silence.